They met on a long ride home just before Christmas. Neither was looking for anything beyond the next stop, the next hour, the simple comfort of movement. But as the night stretched on and the miles passed, shared space became shared time, and something quietly shifted. What we found on the way is a story about connection found in motion, about loneliness softened by kindness, and about how sometimes the most meaningful part of the journey is everything that happens before you arrive. What We Found on the Way. A story by 10 Chapters Studio. Chapter 1. Boarding. The bus station was already crowded when she arrived, winter coats layered over impatience and resignation. People stood in loose clusters, clutching paper cups and phones, watching the departure board as if it might change its mind. It was late enough that the building had taken on a hushed quality, voices lower, movement slower, everyone conserving energy for the hours ahead. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and stepped into line when the boarding announcement came. The bus was heading north, overnight, the long way. She'd memorized the number of hours earlier that afternoon and decided not to think about it again. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and damp wool. She found her seat, window side, midway back, and slid into it, tucking her bag beneath her legs. The seat beside her was still empty. For a moment, she let herself hope it might stay that way. It didn't. He boarded last, scanning ticket stubs with a distracted air, as if he'd arrived at this moment by accident rather than planning. He paused at her row, checked the number, and gave a small, apologetic smile. "Looks like I'm here," he said. She nodded and shifted slightly to make room. "Go ahead." He settled in, taller than the seat seemed designed for, knees angled carefully. They both performed the quiet choreography of strangers sharing space, elbows adjusted, coats folded, eyes averted. Outside, the bus pulled away from the curb, the lights sliding past the windows. Someone a few rows up was already asleep, head tipped forward. Someone else was arguing softly into a phone. The city thinned quickly, buildings giving way to stretches of dark. They rode in silence for several minutes before he spoke again. "Long night ahead," he said, not quite looking at her. "Yeah, that's one way to put it." He laughed softly, a reflex more than a decision. "That's what I'm doing too." They fell quiet again. The road hummed beneath them, steady and unchanging. She watched the reflection of passing lights slide across the glass, thinking about how different this felt from flying. No rush, no sense of being lifted out of one life and dropped into another. Just movement, mile after mile. After a while, he shifted in his seat, running a hand through his hair. "So," he said, tentative, "are you heading all the way to the end of the line?" "Almost," she said. "You?" "Not quite. Close enough, though." She nodded. That seemed to satisfy the question for now. A little later, as the bus settled into its rhythm, he glanced at her again. "Can I ask, why the bus?" It was asked lightly, without judgment, but she considered her answer carefully. She shrugged. It made sense. Slower, but manageable. He smiled, a self-aware curve of his mouth. "I waited too long. By the time I looked, everything else was gone." She turned slightly toward him. "So this was the backup plan." "More like the only plan left," he said. "But I don't hate it. Feels honest somehow." She considered that. "Yeah," she said. "I get that." They shared a look. Not intimate, not searching, just acknowledgement. The bus hit a patch of uneven road, jostling them gently. Somewhere behind them, someone sighed, someone else laughed. The sound carried forward, loose and human. She realized, with mild surprise, that she felt less alone than she had an hour ago. They didn't talk much after that, not yet. They watched the night pass, listened to the low murmur of the bus, the occasional crackle of the driver's radio. At a rest stop, they both stood to stretch, exchanging a brief smile in the aisle before stepping out into the cold. When they returned to their seats, the bus darker now, most passengers asleep, he pulled a book from his bag. She tucked her hands into her sleeves and leaned back, letting her eyes close. She wasn't thinking about home, or Christmas, or what waited at the end of the journey, just the fact that she was moving, and that, for the moment, she wasn't doing it alone. Outside, the road unspooled ahead of them, quiet and unremarkable, and without either of them noticing exactly when it happened, the journey began to feel like something more than time to be filled.
End of chapter. Chapter 2. Settling In. The bus found its pace somewhere beyond the last stretch of city lights. The engine's low drone evened out, a steady sound that made conversation feel optional and sleep tempting. Overhead lights dimmed, and one by one screens went dark. Jackets became blankets, knees angled inward, then relaxed. She shifted in her seat, easing the pressure from her shoulder. The window was cold against her temple, but she didn't mind. Outside, snow flurried lightly, catching the headlights before disappearing again. He noticed her wince and reached down, pulling a folded scarf from his bag. "You want this?" he asked quietly. "It's extra." She hesitated, then accepted it. "Thanks." "No problem." She looped the scarf once around her neck and settled back. Only then did she really look at him. He was better looking than she'd first registered, not in a striking way, but in a steadier one. Kind eyes, a softness at the edges that suggested he listened more than he spoke. The realization made her oddly self-conscious. She adjusted the scarf and turned her gaze to the window. They returned to their separate stillness for a while. The bus rolled on. Somewhere behind them, someone coughed, then apologized aloud, to no one in particular. A child's voice murmured, quickly soothed. The small, ordinary sounds stitched the space together. At the first rest stop, the bus exhaled its passengers into the cold. Doors opened, closed, boots thudded back up the steps. The smell of coffee followed them inside. When everyone had settled again, the road reclaimed its quiet. He leaned back and closed his book. "I always forget how communal this is," he said, voice low. She glanced around. "It's kind of impossible to pretend you're the only one going somewhere." "Yeah," he said. "Flying makes it feel like everyone's sealed off. This," he gestured vaguely, "this makes it harder to disappear." She smiled. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." He studied her for a second, then nodded. "Maybe not." They talked more after that, but not in long stretches. Small exchanges, spaced by silence. Where they worked. She mentioned a couple of part-time digs and a course she was finishing. He talked about a job he liked well enough and a habit of waiting too long to decide things. Neither pressed for details. It felt good to let facts sit without explanation. As he spoke, he glanced down at his hands, rubbing his thumb along the edge of his book. When he looked back up, there was something almost apologetic in his smile, as if he wasn't used to taking up space in someone else's evening. She noticed it and liked him more for it. A few rows ahead, an older man stood up carefully and asked the driver if there was any update on arrival time. The driver answered with practiced patience, weather permitting, traffic willing. The man thanked him and returned to his seat, adjusting a small wrapped box on his lap as if it were fragile. She followed his movement, then looked back toward the dark window. After a moment, she said, "I always forget how different it feels. This much quiet, and then everything all at once." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I don't mind it. I just forget how to fit back in sometimes." She turned slightly toward him. "Like you've been gone longer than you meant to be?" "Exactly."
The bus hit a patch of uneven road, rocking gently. She laughed under her breath, bracing her foot against the floor. "Occupational hazard," he said, "of the long way." "Worth it?" she asked. He considered. "Ask me in 8 hours." She smiled. "Fair." They shared a granola bar he'd brought, breaking it in half with the care of people who had learned not to waste much. She offered gum. He accepted. It was nothing, and it felt like something. As the hours slipped by, the bus grew darker and quieter, conversation fading into the low hum of motion. Most people slept now, heads tipped toward windows or shoulders. The older man with the gift box whispered a phone call, voice thick with tiredness and care. The woman across the aisle adjusted her coat around her knees and closed her eyes. She pulled the scarf tighter and leaned back. He angled himself slightly, giving her space without withdrawing. Their knees brushed once, accidentally. She stilled, unsure whether to move. He hesitated too, then shifted just enough to give her room, not quite pulling away. The space between them felt newly considered. "I'm glad we're sitting here," she said softly, as if saying it louder might disturb the moment. "Me too," he replied. "It makes the time smaller." She smiled at that, eyes closing. The bus carried them forward, mile after mile, through darkness and quiet weather. Nothing dramatic happened, no sudden revelations, just a shared stretch of night unfolding. When she drifted toward sleep, she noticed, dimly, that she felt steadier than before, not because she was closer to home, but because she wasn't counting the distance anymore. The road continued ahead, patient and unremarkable, and somewhere in the gentle hum of motion, the space between strangers narrowed, almost without effort. End of chapter. Chapter 3. Night Niles. She woke to the sound of voices, not loud, just close. The bus had slowed, engine idling unevenly, and a low murmur moved through the rows like a ripple. She lifted her head, disoriented for a moment, the scarf slipping from her shoulder. He was already awake. "We're stopped," he said quietly, leaning in just enough that she didn't have to strain to hear him. "Traffic ahead. Nothing bad, I don't think." She nodded, blinking sleep from her eyes. Outside, darkness pressed close to the windows. Snow dusted the shoulder of the road, catching the glow of hazard lights farther up ahead. "How long?" she asked. He shrugged. "Driver said maybe a bit." Around them, people stirred. Phones came out. Someone groaned softly a few rows back. A woman near the front stood up, trying to see past the aisle, then sat down again with a sigh. She stretched carefully, aware of how close he was now, of how the shared stillness felt different after sleep, less guarded, more familiar. "Sorry," she said, realizing her elbow had brushed his arm. "It's okay," he replied. He didn't move away. The bus rocked slightly as someone walked down the aisle to ask the driver a question. A few minutes passed, 10. The sense of waiting thickened. Across from them, the woman who'd smiled earlier was struggling to settle a restless toddler. The child's shoes had come off at some point, socks mismatched, legs kicking against the seat. "Do you want help?" she asked before she could stop herself. The woman looked up, surprised, then relieved. "If you don't mind." She crouched in the aisle, making a silly face, jingling her keys softly. The toddler paused, curious, then giggled. The sound cut through the bus, bright and sudden. He watched from his seat, something warm crossing his face. "Good distraction," he murmured. She shrugged, a little embarrassed. "Practice." The woman mouthed, "Thank you," as the child settled again, thumb in mouth, eyes drifting closed. She returned to her seat, aware now of how awake she felt. "You're good with kids," he said. "I'm okay,"
she corrected. "I just remember what it's like to be stuck somewhere you didn't choose." He smiled at that, not wide, but genuine. "Yeah, that makes sense." The bus remained still. Snow fell more steadily now, soft against the windows. Somewhere ahead, an accident had slowed traffic to a crawl. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to stretch the night.
People began talking more openly. A man behind them complained about missing a connection. Someone else countered with a story about a worse delay years ago. The shared inconvenience loosened something, made strangers bolder. The older man with the wrapped box stood carefully and offered a bag of chocolates down the aisle. "Holiday emergency supplies," he said, voice light. She took one, passing the bag to him. "Thanks." He unwrapped it slowly, deliberately. "This feels very old-fashioned. Like we're all supposed to talk to each other," she said. "Terrible," he replied, deadpan. She laughed, surprising herself with how easily it came. They ate in companionable silence, watching the lights ahead inch forward. After a while, the bus lurched gently, then began to move again, slow but steady. A quiet cheer rippled through the rows. "Progress," he said. "Eventually," she replied. The road opened up again, the bus picking up speed. The interruption had shifted something. Not dramatically, but enough. The night felt less like something to endure and more like something they were inside together. She glanced at him, noticing the way he held himself now, more relaxed, shoulders looser, gaze less guarded. When he caught her looking, he didn't look away. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she said. "I think so." He nodded, as if that answer mattered. The bus settled back into its rhythm. Snow thinned. Darkness stretched on. She leaned her head lightly against the window again, not quite ready to sleep. After a moment, he spoke. "I'm glad we stopped," he said. She turned toward him. "Really?" "Yeah, it sounds strange, but—" He searched for the words. It made everything feel more real. She considered that, then smiled. "I know what you mean." They didn't say anything else for a while. They didn't need to. Outside, the road continued north, long and patient. Inside, among strangers and small kindnesses, the journey deepened, not because of where it was taking them, but because of how they were moving through it. And for the first time since boarding, she felt the quiet shift from waiting to being present. End of chapter. Chapter 4. Shared Hours. By the time the bus stopped again, the night had softened around them. Not a rest stop this time, just a pause, long enough for the driver to check something up front, long enough for people to stretch in their seats and resettle their belongings. The interruption was brief, almost forgettable, but it marked a change. The hours no longer felt stacked ahead of them. They were simply happening, one after another. She checked her phone and then slipped it back into her pocket. No new messages, nothing urgent. It felt oddly freeing. He noticed the movement. "Anyone waiting up for you?" She shook her head. "Not really. They know I'm on my way." He nodded. "Same." The answer landed between them. Not heavy, not sad, just true. The bus lights flickered slightly, then steadied. Someone nearby shifted, blanket rustling. A man a few rows back snored softly, unapologetic. The intimacy of it all, the shared fatigue, the unfiltered sounds, made the space feel smaller, more human. She adjusted in her seat, knees angled toward him now without thinking. He mirrored the movement unconsciously, as if the alignment made sense. "Do you usually sleep on buses?" "Not well," she said, "but I like pretending I might." He smiled. "I spend most of the time convincing myself I'm comfortable." She laughed quietly. "It's the optimism that gets you." They talked about nothing important, about how winter changed cities, about the strange relief of being unreachable for a while, about how December always seemed to demand reflection at the worst possible time.
I think the rest of the year lets you drift, and then suddenly everyone wants answers. He considered that. Yeah, like you're supposed to know what you're doing by now. Exactly. He glanced at her, hesitating. Do you? She thought about it. The honest answer rose easily, not rehearsed, not defensive. Some days, she said. Enough to keep going. He nodded, relief flickering across his face. That's more than I usually admit. The road outside blurred into a continuous ribbon of dark. Snow came and went in light bursts, never quite settling. The bus hummed steadily, a moving room carrying them through the hours. Across the aisle, the woman with the toddler had shifted, the child now asleep against her chest. The older man cradled his gift box, eyes closed but alert, as if guarding it even in rest. Someone near the back whispered a phone call in another language, voice low and rhythmic. She watched it all with a quiet awareness she hadn't felt earlier. The loneliness she'd brought with her, vague, familiar, hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed shape, less sharp, less singular. Do you ever notice, she said softly, how being tired makes people more honest? He smiled. Or more generous. Or both. They shared another quiet moment, the kind that didn't need punctuation. When she shifted again, her knee brushed his, this time intentionally uncorrected. He noticed, didn't move away. Outside, the road continued its patient stretch north. Inside, the hours were no longer something to survive. They were something shared. And somewhere between 1 mile marker and the next, without announcement or certainty, the night stopped feeling long.
End of chapter. Chapter 5. The Stopped Road. The bus slowed so gradually that at first it felt intentional, like easing into another stretch of caution. The engine dropped an octave. Conversation paused. Heads lifted. Then the brake lights ahead came into view, too many of them, glowing red through the falling snow. The bus came to a full stop. A few people groaned, softly at first, then with more volume as minutes passed without movement. Someone stood in the aisle to look forward. Another checked a map on their phone, thumb flicking restlessly across the screen. She felt the shift before she understood it, a tightening in the air, the sense that this wasn't just traffic. The driver's voice crackled over the intercom, calm but careful. "There's been an accident ahead," he said. "We're safe here, but it may take some time." A hush followed. Not fear exactly, something closer to alertness. She turned toward him without thinking. He was already looking at her. "Okay," she said quietly, as if grounding herself. "Okay," he echoed. They sat like that for a moment, watching the snow fall harder now, swirling in the headlights. Up ahead, hazard lights flashed intermittently, illuminating the outline of cars pulled to the shoulder. After a few minutes, the driver stood and opened a door, stepping down to speak with emergency personnel farther up the road. Cold air rushed in briefly before the door closed again. People began to murmur. Someone asked if they could get out. Another worried aloud about the time. She noticed movement outside. A car angled wrong, its front end crumpled against the guardrail. Another vehicle behind it, door open. A figure in a reflective vest waved traffic slowly past. "Someone's hurt," she said softly. He followed her gaze. His jaw tightened, not in panic, but focus. A woman near the front stood up. "Does anyone have blankets?" she asked the bus, voice unsteady. "They're asking." She was on her feet before she could talk herself out of it. "I do," she said, already pulling her coat from the seat. "And a scarf." He stood too. "I'll come." They moved down the aisle together, gathering what they could, jackets, scarves, a spare hat offered by someone they didn't know. The older man with the gift box pressed a wool blanket into her hands without a word. Outside, the cold hit hard. Snow soaked into her shoes almost immediately. The scene was quieter than she expected. No sirens yet, just voices and the crunch of boots on snow. A woman sat on the guardrail, shaking, face pale. Another man stood beside her, arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders, speaking in low, steady tones. She knelt without hesitation, draping the blanket over the woman's lap. "You're okay," she said, not because she knew it was true, but because it mattered to say it. He hovered nearby, offering his jacket to someone else, then crouching to hold a flashlight steady while a paramedic checked a wrist, a forehead, a knee. He moved carefully, respectfully, as if instinctively aware of the line between helping and crowding. At one point, the woman she was sitting with reached out and gripped her hand hard. "Thank you," she whispered, breath fogging the air. "I just needed someone to stay." "I'm here," she said, and she meant it. Time stretched. The cold numbed her fingers. Somewhere behind her, someone cried quietly. Somewhere else, someone laughed with relief when told an injury was minor. She became aware of him again when he touched her elbow gently. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, throat tight. "Yeah, I think so." He didn't let go right away. Eventually, headlights shifted. A tow truck arrived. Sirens followed, distant, then close. The scene loosened, order slowly reasserting itself. When they were waved back toward the bus, she felt oddly reluctant to leave, as if stepping away meant abandoning something important. He walked beside her, their shoulders brushing in the narrow path back. Inside, warmth rushed to meet them. People looked up as they re-entered, eyes searching, grateful. "Everyone's okay," someone said aloud, voice carrying. A collective breath released. They sank back into their seats, hearts still racing, hands cold. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he exhaled slowly. "I didn't think—" He stopped, searching. "I didn't think I mattered much tonight." She turned to him fully. "You did." The certainty in her voice surprised them both. Around them, the bus settled again. The road would open soon. The journey would continue. But something had shifted, quietly, irrevocably. She looked down at their hands and realized they were still touching. Neither of them moved away.
End of chapter. Chapter 6. After.
The bus didn't move right away. For a while it idled in place, engine humming low, as if giving everyone time to settle back into themselves. People spoke in murmurs now, voices softer, stripped of impatience. Someone passed a bottle of water down the aisle. Another offered tissues. The small kindnesses continued, quieter but deliberate. She rubbed her hands together, trying to bring the feeling back into her fingers. The warmth inside the bus felt almost overwhelming after the cold, like stepping into another version of the night. He shrugged back into his jacket, slower than before, eyes unfocused. When he finally looked at her, there was something different there. Not urgency, not fear, presence. "Thanks for going out there, with me." She shook her head. "I didn't really think about it." "That's what I mean," he replied. The driver's voice came over the intercom again, steady and reassuring. They'd be moving shortly. A delay, but nothing more. A few people clapped softly, more in relief than celebration. The bus lurched forward at last, tires crunching over packed snow. Outside, the accident scene receded into darkness, swallowed by distance. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. People talked across aisles now, trading brief stories, where they were headed, who they were trying to reach. No one overshared, no one needed to. It was enough to acknowledge that everyone had just been reminded of something important. The older man leaned across the aisle toward them. "You two did good," he said quietly. "Thank you."
She felt heat rise to her face. Anyone would have helped. He smiled, unconvinced, and settled back, his hand resting protectively over the gift box. She turned toward the window, watching snow streak past, the road dark and open again. The sense of gratitude surprised her, not the dramatic kind, just a steady awareness of being warm, of being unhurt, of having arrived back at her seat with someone beside her. He followed her gaze. I keep thinking about how close it all felt. Not scary, just real. She nodded, like the rest of the stuff fades for a second. Yeah. He paused. All the comparing, all the worrying about how things look. She smiled faintly. All the mental lists. He laughed under his breath, especially those. They fell quiet again, but it was an easier silence than before, less guarded, less provisional. Across the aisle, the woman with the toddler caught her eye and mouthed, "Thank you," again. The child slept on, oblivious, one small hand curled into the fabric of his mother's coat. She leaned back, exhaustion settling in now that the adrenaline had passed. Her body felt heavy, but her mind was clear. "I think I forget," she said after a while, choosing her words carefully, "how much of life just happens next to you, whether you're paying attention or not." He turned toward her, listening. "And you don't get to decide which parts matter until later." Exactly. The bus hummed steadily, reclaiming its rhythm. Snow thinned to flurries. The world outside returned to its quiet blur. He shifted slightly, their shoulders touching, this time without apology. She didn't move away. "You know," he said, almost to himself, "I've spent a lot of time lately feeling like I was behind, like everyone else had some kind of timing I missed." She glanced at him. "And now?" He considered. "Now I think maybe I was just taking a longer route." Something in her chest softened at that. "Yeah, me too." They didn't need to say more. The bus carried them forward, mile after mile, through a night that no longer felt empty. Whatever waited at the end of the journey could wait a little longer. For now, this shared after was enough.
End of chapter. Chapter 7. Toward Morning.
The sky began to lighten, almost imperceptibly, the dark thinning at its edges. It wasn't dawn yet, just the suggestion of it, the promise that night, no matter how long, was always temporary. She noticed it first in the reflection on the window, the faint gray replacing black, the way the snow along the roadside became visible again, no longer guessed at by headlights alone. "Morning's coming," she said softly. He followed her gaze. "Feels like we earned it." She smiled at that. Most of the bus slept now, bodies folded into themselves, breaths slow and uneven. A few were awake, quietly alert, as if unwilling to miss the transition. The driver changed stations, low music replacing static, something gentle, familiar without being recognizable. She shifted carefully, joints stiff, and reached for her water bottle. He took it from her without comment, twisted the cap open, and handed it back. The ease of the gesture surprised her, not because it was intimate, but because it felt assumed, like something they'd done before. "Thanks. Anytime." Outside, the road stretched pale and empty. Farm fields slid past, dusted with snow, fences appearing and disappearing in steady rhythm. It felt different in daylight, less enclosed, less dreamlike, more honest. Do you ever feel like night compresses things? Like everything important happens faster? He considered, "I think night just takes away the distractions." That too. They watched the horizon brighten, sharing the quiet without effort. The bus slowed briefly as it passed through a small town, storefronts dark, a single gas station glowing like a lighthouse. Someone stirred behind them. A phone rang and was quickly silenced. Life, inching back in. He glanced at her, hesitating. "Can I ask you something?" She turned toward him. "Sure." Would this still feel like something if it had been easier? He gestured vaguely as if indicating the whole night, like if we'd just flown. She thought about it, about the hours, the waiting, the cold, the way the accident had shifted everything into focus. "I don't think so," she said honestly. "I think we would have stayed polite strangers." He nodded. "Yeah, that's what I thought." The bus began to slow again, this time with intention. The driver announced the next city stop. A handful of passengers gathered their things, blinking themselves awake.
Her chest tightened slightly at the sound. Not dread, just awareness. The journey was changing shape again. "You're getting off before me," she said. "2 stops," he replied. "You?" "3." They both absorbed that. "I'm glad it was this way," she said after a moment. "Even with everything." "Especially with everything," he corrected gently. The bus pulled into the station, brakes hissing softly. Doors opened, cold air rushed in, sharper now in daylight. People stood, stretched, said quiet goodbyes to no one in particular. The older man with a gift box paused beside their seats. "Safe travels," he said to them both, eyes kind, "and happy Christmas." "You too," she replied. As the bus pulled away again, lighter now, something loosened in her chest. The ending was approaching, not all at once, but steadily. She turned to him. "Whatever happens next," she said, choosing the words carefully, "I'm glad we were on this part of the road together." He smiled, soft and unguarded. "Me too." Outside, the day unfolded fully at last, and though the miles ahead were fewer now, they carried the weight of everything that had already passed, quietly, unmistakably. End of chapter. Chapter 8. Approaching. By late morning, the bus felt different, not quieter. People were awake now, talking softly, phones out, bags repacked, but lighter, as if the night had carried away some shared weight. Jackets were unzipped, curtains pulled back. The world outside looked almost ordinary again. Roads cleared, snow pushed aside in uneven banks. She watched it pass with a kind of careful attention, aware that they were closer now, closer to exits, to reunions, to the moment when this small, contained world would dissolve. He checked the screen above the aisle, then his phone. "Next stop's mine," he said, not looking at her right away. She nodded. "I know." The knowledge had been sitting between them for a while now, unspoken but present. It hadn't spoiled anything. If anything, it had sharpened it, made every small moment feel deliberate. Across the aisle, the woman with the toddler gathered her things, lifting the sleeping child gently, murmuring reassurances that weren't needed. A man farther back practiced what sounded like an apology under his breath, stopping and starting again. Everyone was rehearsing something, she realized. Words, smiles, versions of themselves they'd soon step back into. She shifted in her seat, suddenly aware of her hands, her posture, the way she wanted to remember this exact angle of the light. The bus slowed slightly, turn signals blinking. "Do you ever wish," she asked, keeping her voice light, "that there were more in-between places?" He smiled faintly. "All the time. Places where you don't have to explain who you are yet, or who you're supposed to be," he added. They shared a quiet look, the kind that carried more than either of them tried to name.
The bus pulled into the station. Brakes hissed. The doors opened with a familiar sigh. People stood, stretching stiff legs, reaching for bags. The ordinary choreography of arrival. He rose slowly, retrieving his backpack from the rack above. For a moment he hesitated there in the aisle, taller now, less contained by the seat. "I'm really glad I sat next to you," he said. She felt the words land somewhere steady. "Me too." He nodded as if confirming something to himself. Then, before stepping away, he reached down and pressed a folded slip of paper into her hand. "In case," he said, "if you want." She closed her fingers around it without looking. "I do." He smiled, shy, hopeful, unguarded, and then he was gone, moving down the aisle, swallowed by coats and movement and the cold rush of the open door. She stayed seated as the bus pulled away again, heart beating faster than it had all night. She unfolded the paper slowly, reading the name and number written in careful handwriting. It wasn't a promise, just an opening. The bus merged back onto the road, carrying her forward. She glanced once more at the place he'd been standing, then looked out the window again. There were still miles to go, still another stop, still a home waiting that wasn't quite the same as before. But now, tucked into her pocket, was the knowledge that the journey hadn't ended when he stepped off. It had only changed direction.
End of chapter. Chapter 9. After Arrival. Home was louder than she remembered. Not in an overwhelming way, just fuller. Doors opening and closing, familiar voices overlapping, the hum of a house already in motion. She stood just inside the entry for a moment, coat still on, bag at her feet, letting it all wash over her. Someone called her name. Someone else laughed. She moved forward, hugged, smiled, answered questions she'd expected and some she hadn't. How was the trip? Long, fine, worth it. She kept the answers light, accurate without being complete. Later, when the house settled into its evening rhythm and she finally had a moment to herself, she slipped upstairs and closed the door gently behind her. The quiet was different here, not shared, not held, but it was still welcome. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the folded slip of paper from her pocket. The name, the number, written carefully, as if he'd wanted it to be legible even after hours in a coat pocket. She smiled despite herself. Downstairs, someone called out about dinner. She answered back, then looked at the paper again. Thought about the night, the snow, the stopped road, the way he'd said he was taking a longer route, and how it had felt like permission. She opened her phone. "Made it in," she typed, then erased it. Too abrupt. "Hope you got where you were going," she tried next. Better, but still cautious. She paused, fingers hovering, and then wrote what felt truest. "I keep thinking about the way there. I'm glad we shared it." She stared at the message for a few seconds longer than necessary, then hit send before she could second-guess herself. The reply came sooner than she expected. "Me too," he wrote. "I didn't realize how much I needed that night until it was over." She leaned back against the pillows, the phone warm in her hand. The house noise below felt less intrusive now, more like a backdrop. They exchanged a few more messages, small, unforced, where he'd ended up, how tired they both were, a shared laugh about stiff legs and bad coffee. Then, after a pause that felt intentional, he sent, "I don't want that to be the end of it." Her chest tightened, not with fear, but recognition. "Neither do I," she wrote. "We didn't even finish the conversation." A moment passed. "There's a city between us," he replied. "Neutral ground. After Christmas?" She smiled. the decision settling easily, without drama. "After Christmas," she answered. Downstairs, someone knocked on her door, calling her back to the table. She slipped the phone into her pocket and stood, smoothing her sweater, feeling something steady and new beneath the familiar rituals. Love hadn't arrived all at once. It hadn't announced itself with certainty or promises, but it had made itself known, quietly, unmistakably, in the space between hesitation and choice. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel behind. She felt exactly where she was supposed to be.
End of chapter.
Chapter 10. What We Found. They met in a city that belonged to neither of them. It was colder than she expected, the kind of cold that sharpened everything: breath, sound, the awareness of her own body standing still among people who were all moving with purpose. She arrived early and lingered just inside the station doors, coat still zipped, fingers curled into her sleeves. Trains came and went, announcements echoed overhead. She watched strangers reunite and separate again, each moment complete without her. She wondered briefly if he would be taller than she remembered, if the night on the bus had softened him in her mind, if seeing him again would feel awkward, or worse, ordinary. Then she saw him. He stood just beyond the doors, scanning the crowd, hair dusted with snow, hands shoved into the pockets of his coat as if to anchor himself. The recognition was immediate and physical, a quiet jolt low in her chest. He looked up, caught her eye, and smiled, not polite, not careful, real. "Hi," he said when he reached her. "Hi." She didn't think about it. She stepped forward, and he did the same. The hug began the way hugs always did at first, measured, familiar, and then shifted as if something in both of them had given permission at the same moment. His arms tightened, her cheek brushed his collar. The cold disappeared. When they eased apart, neither of them moved far. They walked without a plan. Coffee first, steam rising into the air between them, a narrow street edged with old snowbanks. A bookstore they wandered into just to be somewhere warm, touching spines without really reading titles. The city moved around them, indifferent and alive. "It feels different," he said eventually. "Being here?" she asked. "No," he said, glancing at her. "Being here with you." She stopped walking, turned fully toward him. The moment felt sudden and inevitable all at once. "It does," she said. "It feels like something I don't want to explain away later." He let out a breath, slow and honest. "I've been very good at that," he said, convincing myself that the things I want will wait. "And now?" she asked. "And now," he said, quieter, "I don't want this to turn into something I almost had." The words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. They landed because they were clean. "I don't want that either," she said. "I don't want this to stay on the bus." His smile was immediate, relief, certainty, something warmer underneath. "Then don't let it." She didn't answer with words. She reached for him instead, fingers curling into the fabric of his coat, pulling him closer. The kiss started slow, exploratory, as if they were both checking that this was real. Then it deepened, heat blooming where the cold had been, the night on the bus folding into this moment, every glance, every pause, every unsaid thing finding its place. His hand settled at her back, steady and sure, the other lifted to her jaw, thumb warm against her skin. They eased back just enough to look at each other, still close, still warm, foreheads nearly touching. "That," he said softly, "was worth the long way." She laughed under her breath, the sound shaky and full. It really was. They stayed like that for another moment, letting the city pass without them.
The noise, the movement, none of it demanded anything. Whatever came next, distance, time, effort, it didn't feel theoretical anymore. It felt chosen. This wasn't a plan, it was a beginning, and it had started exactly where it was supposed to, on the way.
End of chapter and end of story. If you enjoyed this quiet journey, please subscribe for more full-length, slow-burn romance audiobooks.